closet. This happened at my mom and dad's house many years before I was born. Both my grandparents were very honest people and would not make something like this up. I have to believe that every experience that was told to me was true. My grandparents went to bed one evening about 10 p.m. On one side of their bedroom was a closet that ran the width of the bedroom, with one door at each end of the closet. They got into bed and began drifting off to sleep. They started to hear a rattling noise coming from one of the closet doors. My grandparents listened to the noise. It would last for a minute, then stop, then resume again a few minutes later. About 15 minutes, my dad got out of bed, turned the lights on, and opened the door. When he opened the door, the noise stopped, and he could find nothing making the noise. He said the noise sounded like two metal hangers banging on each other. The only problem was, there were no metal hangers in the closet without clothes on them. After trying to find a cause for the noise, he turned out the lights and got back into bed. As soon as he did, the noise started again. He went back to look and again found nothing. Once again he got into bed and the noise began once more. By this point, the noise had been going on for over an hour, and both my grandparents were beginning to get a little scared. They started to pray for the noise to stop, but as they were praying, the noise only got louder. By about 3 in the morning, the noise started to quiet down, and my grandmother drifted off to sleep. My grandfather, still fully awake, had been watching the closet ever since the noise began. As he was lying there watching, he saw a black figure come through the closet door, and it began moving close to the side of the bed my grandmother was on. As soon as the figure reached the end of the bed, it vanished. At that exact moment, my mom woke up and said something had just grabbed her foot and pulled on it several times. My grandparents at that point gave up trying to get some sleep and went down to the kitchen to have some coffee and wait for sunrise. A couple hours later, they decided to check and see if the noise had stopped. As they were walking up the stairs, they heard the noise coming from the closet. Right when they reached the top of the stairs, the noise abruptly stopped. Moments after the noise had finally silenced, the telephone began to ring. My grandfather answered it. It was his brother-in-law. He told my dad that my grandmother's mother had committed suicide the night before by drowning herself in the local lake, and they had just discovered her body at first light. My grandmother, until the day she died, believed that the noises that they heard were being made by her mother trying to tell her goodbye. This is a story from Jackie in California. Haunted Shrine and Shadow Person at UC Santa Barbara. I wanted to share a couple stories about the house where I grew up with my family. We fit 2 families in a 3-bedroom house. Along with my immediate family, I lived with my uncle, aunt, and grandma. The house they bought was a newly constructed home. In fact, it was the model home for the neighborhood. There was nothing scary about the house, since it was completely new. However, our family, being Cambodian, and especially because my grandma was very religious, built a huge shrine in the study room. For those who don't know, many Cambodians are Theravada Buddhists, which is a very peaceful religion, but it is one of the oldest forms of Buddhism. The shrine my grandma built consisted of about 20 different statues of various Buddha and Hindu gods. I believe that this shrine attracted many spirits to our home. My sister was about 7 years old when she started playing with orbs floating in the air, I would see her do it in the hallway, and thought that she was just messing around. She would try to tell us about them, but I didn't believe her. She also constantly saw a dressed man in jeans and a red shirt. She saw him randomly around the house. She also said she would see random spirits. They looked human, but their faces were blurry. She once asked my uncle, who was actually pretty sensitive to the spirits himself, "Who is that man sitting on the couch?" My uncle got upset and replied, "Stop trying to scare people." I believe my uncle did not want to admit anything to the younger children. He once complained to my sister, "Why do you always play your radio so loud in the middle of the night?" Confused, she told him that she never does that. Her radio was a Barbie boombox that she kept in the room where all 4 kids slept. If it played in the middle of the night, it would have awakened all of us. Another incident that is directly related to that shrine was a dream that my aunt had. My aunt was not religious and was skeptical about spirits, but one dream had shook her up. She dreamt that one of the statues belonging to my grandmother's shrine was walking around her room. It then went into her walk-in closet. She told the family about the dream, and my grandmother believed that it was harmless and was possibly a good sign. But I think imagining that statue in the room would have been quite creepy. Shadow person at UC Santa Barbara. In 2010, I was a student at UC Santa Barbara. Right after winter break, I had to travel on Amtrak to arrive back to school. It was an unusual winter for California, and some of the roads were blocked off because of snow. The Amtrak bus had to stop to take on additional people, and instead of arriving at 7 p.m., I arrived back to campus at 2 a.m. It was dark and cold, and I had to walk alone to my dorm with my rolling suitcase. On the campus, before reaching my dorm, there were fences put up during construction, so I had to take an alternative route. I walked around and approached the music building, which had an outdoors hall that was kept pretty well lit. I decided to go through the hallway to reach my dorm. As I was walking, I saw a dark, shadowy figure in the middle of the music hall walking toward me. It was moving slightly side to side as it approached slowly. I could tell the figure had a hood and had really baggy clothes, but otherwise there was no shape of a body, just lots of layers of clothes. I was not afraid, but something in me told me to go the other way and to leave the music hall, so I did just that. As I walked away from the music hall, I stopped and waited to see if the figure would come out. It never did, which was strange because it was walking in that direction. I went around the music building and got safely back to my dorm. It's been years now, and I have told my friends about it, but ever since listening to your ghost group stories, and just thinking about this more, I'm certain it was a shadow person. It was dressed unlike any other college student and was moving in such a peculiar way. I'm glad I had the instinct to leave and that I was too tired to be afraid. I wonder if anyone else has any creepy stories on this campus. This is a story from Max in Manchester, England. The Open Door. I'm 10 years old and live in Manchester, England. I'm lucky enough to live next door to my best friend. We live in 1930s workers' cottages near an old mill. Last Sunday, I was next door at my friend's house. We were downstairs relaxing and watching YouTube videos, while his dad and baby sister slept, and his mom was at his grandma's house. While we were sitting there, the lounge door blew open and hit my right arm. It left a bright red mark. This took us by surprise, as it was not a windy day and no windows were open. Feeling a bit unsettled, we went upstairs and continued watching our videos there. After about 5 minutes or so, my friend and I heard his bedroom door open quickly. We were expecting to see his dad as we looked toward the door, but to our horror, the doorway was empty. The door then slammed shut with an ear-splitting bang. That woke the baby up. He started to cry straight away. We ran into his dad's bedroom, where I found his dad still in bed. His dad was furious because he thought we woke up the baby. As soon as we realized it wasn't his dad who opened the door, we ran into my friend's room and closed the door. We were terrified. We stayed there until his mom came home about a half an hour later. We told his mom what had happened and asked her if she had popped home to check on us, but she hadn't been in the house the whole day. I then went home to my mom and dad and told them what had happened. I went to show them the red mark on my arm, but it had disappeared. I was well spooked and won't be going back to my friend's house anytime soon. The story's from Susu in Baltimore, Maryland. Are you having a nightmare? And the Old Farmhouse. I'm 24 now, and have since moved from an old farmhouse into a small townhouse on the outskirts of Baltimore City. It's relatively new, probably no older than 30 years old, and is stretched on either side to several other houses. My bedroom was in the basement. It was finished and very comfortable, though still kind of creepy. One night I was sleeping alone. My boyfriend had gone home instead of spending the night as he usually did. I was having a hard time falling asleep, having grown accustomed to him being next to me. My sleep was fitful and restless the whole evening, until around 4 a.m. I awoke immediately, felt an intense feeling of dread. I had awoken, but something told me not to open my eyes. The source of the fear seemed to be radiating from the stairwell leading into the basement. One side of the stairwell was a wall, and the other side was an open space that faced my bed. At the very top of the stairs, even though my eyes were closed, I could feel him staring at me. It was the presence of a small child, 6 to 7 years old. I could feel him peering at me, the same way my 2-year-old daughter did when she comes to me in the morning. But this wasn't the same innocent energy that my daughter gives off. It was something dark. Frozen and unable to move, I didn't know what to do. It was silent, and I did my best to pretend I was still asleep, hoping he would go away. Nothing happened for several minutes, and I still didn't want to move, my racing heartbeat the only thing I heard, thudding loudly in my ears. Suddenly, out of the silence, came a small, flat, childish voice.
Are you having a nightmare?
Such a simple and presumably innocent question shouldn't have had so much malice behind it, especially coming from a child. As soon as the words were in the air, my heart nearly exploded out of my chest. Soon the haze and fear that had filled the room had dissipated, and I was alone. I remember feeling cold and confused, like I had all those years ago in the farmhouse. Though this time, I didn't go running to my parents. I did, however, call my boyfriend, and he helped soothe me until my fear subsided. He, of course, told me it was only a nightmare, and honestly, I really wish it had been. Everywhere I go now, I experience something. The women in my family, especially on my father's side, have always had an uncanny way of being able to feel, see, and hear spirits and energies. My aunt, for instance, often hears the voices of friends and family members days after their death, and will forward last messages for them. My mother can feel energy and is very susceptible to it. For me, I wasn't as open until I got into my teens. Thinking back, I've always kind of known they were there, but I didn't pay much attention to them. I don't see them clearly. I mostly feel them. It's a heavy feeling, like a wool blanket is being pulled over your consciousness. Sometimes it's pleasant, and I'm thankful I can experience it. But other times, like this one, and the one from my childhood, I wish I hadn't experienced it. The Old Farmhouse. When I was 10, my family moved into my grandfather's old farmhouse. The house had been in our family over 45 years and was over 100 years old. Everything about that house and the land around it had a very heavy, haunted feeling. Anyone who had spent any amount of time in that house had some form of experience. At first, the experiences were relatively innocent and not so much frightening as they were weird. One night I had a friend sleep over. She awoke in the middle of the night and saw a man in red flannel standing over us. Thinking it was my father at first, she groggily asked him what time it was. The man just shrugged and mumbled, "I don't know," before turning and walking away. The next morning, as we were messing about the house, she pointed out an old photo of my uncle and excitedly said, "That's the man I saw last night." I stared at her and said, "That's my uncle. There's no way it could have been him." She was adamant, though, and I remember feeling an excited chill as I told her in a low voice, "My uncle died in a car accident over 30 years ago." Her face paling slightly, she changed the subject. In that house, we had an ancient attic that faced my sister's bedroom. We kept it locked because if not, it would open on its own. One night, my sister and I were home alone, and I was in our bathroom doing my usual evening routine. Our bathroom faced the bedroom as well as the attic, so I had a good view of both. My sister was in her room doing homework, and I needed something from that bedroom. Flinging open the door, I loudly and annoyingly, as older siblings often do, grabbed the object I was looking for. I waltzed out, leaving the bedroom door wide open. I went back into the bathroom, and my sister yelled behind me, "You could have at least shut the door." And before I could say anything, the door swung shut. I stood there with my jaw dropped. My sister called out, "Thank you." And all I could do was mutter back, "That wasn't me." She shot out of the room, and we locked ourselves in the bathroom together until our parents came home. My mother also experienced things, such as the feeling of someone getting into bed with her. Thinking it was my father, she was shocked when she heard him talk from the bathroom across the room. Sometimes she was home by herself, and she heard steps and voices in other rooms. My father has also recounted tales from when he was a boy, and how he would hear strange things at night. All these experiences changed as I got older and more interested in the occult. Eventually, I started playing around with Ouija boards, making my own out of paper and markers, and using shot glasses as planchettes. I'd spend hours and hours playing by myself, talking to spirits. But I now believe that opened doors to things that I couldn't begin to comprehend or control. My grandfather died while we were living in the house, and after his passing, his spirit would still interact with us. You could tell it was him by the little things he would do, like flick the lights in his bedroom on and off, or move the curtain that separated his bedroom from our family room. They were little signature things he used to do while he was alive. I always felt his spirit close to me, and when the day came for us to move, I remember feeling an intense aura of sadness. It was like the house itself was mourning. I dream about the house every once in a while, and sometimes it feels like something dark is still in there, waiting for me to come back. Even now, no matter where I go, something paranormal happens. I almost don't get scared anymore. Almost. If you're a fan of Anything Ghost, and you've blown through those 10 free episodes that are available to you, maybe it's time to take a look at the Anything Ghost VIP group. There's a one-time membership fee, and this will give you access to the complete Anything Ghost archives dating back over 11 years. That's thousands of creepy paranormal experiences, like the ones you're hearing in this episode. Plus, you'll get access to an early episode release to each new episode. And there are other extras as well. Complete your Anything Ghost library. Go to www.anythingghost.com and then go to the VIP group tab for more information. Then close your eyes and enter the world of Anything Ghost. And this story is from Jeffrey in Pennsylvania, the Stacks area of the Pattee Library at Penn State. The first part of this story is a little history about the Pattee Library at Penn State and the area of the library known as the Stacks. Over 45 years ago, on November 28, 1969, a Penn State student named Betsy Aardsma was murdered in the basement area of the Pattee Library. This is the part of the library known as the Stacks. Betsy was stabbed once through the heart while she was doing research. The murder has remained unsolved for over 45 years. Since her murder, people have been having sightings and experiences in this area of the library. I believe it was my junior year in high school and my brother's freshman year at Penn State. A friend and myself went to visit my brother for the weekend and to attend a football game. While there, my brother had to do some studying Saturday morning before the game. So my friend and I went with him to the library. Once we were there, my brother said he needed a book from the area known as the Stacks. My brother asked me to go get the book, and I went with my friend. Because after what my brother had told me about the Stacks, I was not going alone. While we were down there, I went down one row, and my friend went down another, as we searched for the book. The two rows were right next to each other. After a short while, I heard a voice say, "Help." I thought it was my friend at first, but the voice was female, so I figured it was another student in the Stacks with us. No big deal. But then, I felt someone poke my shoulder from behind. I spun around thinking my friend was going to be there to tell me he found the book. Nope, nobody was there. This was quickly followed by a cool breeze on my neck. After that, I went to find my friend and told him what happened. He said he heard a voice too. He went looking for her but couldn't find her. He said someone had also tapped him on the shoulder and that he'd thought it was me. Well, we got out of there and told my brother, "Get your own book." And it's a short story from Park in St. Paul, Minnesota. The Haunted Cat Statue. I've always had issues with sleep. I have had night terrors, random bouts of sleepwalking, and many instances of sleep paralysis. When I was 12, I went antiquing with my mother. I bought an old painted ceramic cat statue, and I put it in its appropriate spot in my room. That night, I had a terrible dream. A large cat with rat teeth and no eyes was sitting right next to my head. I couldn't move and could only look out of the corner of my eye at it. Every time I was able to break out of the dream, I would fall right back in, and it would be waiting for me. It went on like that the whole night, and I was terrified. When morning finally arrived and I was out of bed making breakfast, I was no longer afraid of whatever it was. I just felt extremely sad and sorry for it. I knew that it was a sad spirit and that it was connected to that antique statue. So I moved it outside in the garden and haven't had a dream about the eyeless cat since. Now, this is a story from Jolie in the U.S. The cat came back.
Hello everyone, I am Jolie, and I'd like to share a story about a ghost that might also be a cat. And so a couple years back, my husband and I, something started to change in the house. We weren't quite ourselves. We both recognized it. Like, arguments were becoming more frequent. We weren't feeling like ourselves, and we started talking about it, and I threw out the suggestion, like, let's just start with our home and work our way up if need be. I mean, we worked on our home in every way kind of possible. We reorganized it, we cleaned it, and then afterwards, I mean, we went to town with the sage. My husband was going through the home with the bells and the sage. As he's walking through, like, he's getting kind of positively aggressive about it, which was surprising because that's not the type of person he is. And so I'm following around the apartment, and he's in every nook and cranny, and he's reclaiming our home. He gets to our patio door, and he says, surprisingly, I will now walk you out. You are no longer welcome here, and I am going to walk you out of our home. And he opens up the sliding door, and he walks into our patio, and he closes the screen door and says, I'm going to walk you out onto the street. You're no longer allowed in our home. And walks into the sidewalk and takes a right up along our patio wall and walks up the street a little bit just to walk it entirely away from our apartment. And he gets to about midway parallel to our patio, and he's like, I'm releasing you. You're no longer allowed in our house. Takes a moment, and he walks back into our patio, locks the little door, and we sit down at the table that we set up outside in the patio, which happened to be parallel to where he stopped. And the table is right along the patio wall. And we sit down for a moment, and we look at each other, and we're actually really tired. We're just like, we did it. All right. We kind of reclaimed our home, not on, like, at the time, it really did not feel like on a paranormal level, but as in, like, we just took an entire day just to shape our home the way we want it. And then we heard the noise. And it was the craziest sounding thing I've ever heard in my entire life. And it came from our right, and it came right around the sound. The sound was coming kind of from our feet. And it was a screeching, crying sound. And I mean, it was like 30 seconds after we locked this patio door. We look at each other and we're like, what? What is that? And we can't quite figure out, is it like coming from the street? Is it coming from our neighbors? And then we realize that it is actually coming from beneath the table. And so we both scoot back from the table and we look down and we see two paws coming through our fence. So our fence to our patio is cinder block, and it has like little holes in the cinder block. And we're watching two completely black paws shoot in and out of this cinder block at our ankles, underneath the table. And it's not like, not even playful. It is, these are definite cat paws, very furry cat paws that are shooting in and out of the holes in our patio. And the sound that's coming from the creature that owns these paws is like it's a wailing cat screaming, fighting sound. And these paws are coming at us. And my husband and I, we like shoot back in our chairs and we're looking down at this scene. And we can't quite believe what we're seeing. Like, this is not real. Apparently, it looks like this cat is desperately trying to get in through our wall, and it's desperately trying to get at us, is what it looks like. And my husband and I, we are cat people. Like, we own cats. Cats are our babies, and we're looking at this seemingly sick cat, like losing its mind, trying to get in through its wall. It seems like it's almost like bashing itself into the wall, trying to get through. And my very first thought is like, we need to take this cat to the vet. And so as I'm watching this absolutely insane scene, I get up and I walk to the patio door to unlock it and walk out on the sidewalk to see what's happening. And my husband turns to me, he grabs me and he's like, I just walked evil out of this place. I'm not going to let it back in. And in about that 10-second episode, as I'm about to unlock the door, and I never did, but as I kind of had my hand up by the lock, I turned around and I saw this cat, the same creature, jump 6 feet up in the air, up onto our patio, and it looked like a normal cat, as you would describe it, and it was standing on top of our patio wall, and it is looking for a way to jump back in to our side of the wall from the sidewalk. And it takes me a moment to realize this thing jumped that high. And then there's a moment where I'm like, cats can do kind of enormous feats, but I'm like, this is too high. How did it suddenly jump up? And it is looking for a way to jump back down onto our patio. It's doing the kind of the cat almost head bob, trying to judge where it's gonna jump down. And that is when I lose it. I go kind of berserker on this cat. And I run at it and I start screaming. I wish I could remember every single word I was screaming, but it was along the lines of like, you are not allowed here, you're not allowed here, you must leave, you're not allowed here. And I chase this cat down our patio wall, and so we have a patio wall that's about 10 feet long. It's pretty long, and as I'm chasing it, what I remember most is this cat kept turning around and hissing at me the entire time. And it was an entirely black cat, looked very seemingly normal, and I hate that it's like so ridiculous, like it's a black cat. Like we have black cats. They're our babies. But here's this black cat that is on our patio wall that shouldn't be there, that was already kind of losing its mind, trying to smash its way into our place at us. And now, as I'm like telling it to get off our patio wall, it's like hissing and spitting, and it's not normal. There are so many things that were so wrong in this situation. And I chased it all the way down to the end of the patio wall. And it was a Seattle night, so it was all dark, and this was an all-black cat. And it jumped off the patio wall at the very end, where I chased it off. And it jumped into the shadows and disappeared. Now, I mean, was it just a really sick cat? And I never got it help, and it was all black cat and just disappeared into the night, or was it something else? All I know is that there was something that unnerved me so much about the way it jumped in the shadows, and it just could not be seen, even in like a faint street light. It was gone all of a sudden. And so I chased this thing off our patio wall, and it disappeared. I stood there for a moment, kind of to make sure it was gone, and I walked back to our table on the patio, where my husband was dumbstruck. He just didn't have anything to say. And I sit down with him, and I look at him, and I was like, did that just happen? Like this whole episode lasted maybe 3 minutes, and it felt like it lasted a much longer period, but it was absolutely surreal. And all my husband could respond with was he was like, yeah, that really happened. I don't know what that was. Again, this is a man who, he believes in the paranormal well enough, but it's just not something that's ever going to come to his forefront. That day it did, though. That day, he was really wanting to reclaim our home on a spiritual level, and he was adamant about walking out negative energies that were in the home. But neither of us could understand what just happened with this cat. It really was not normal. But we never saw this cat again. We've never had any kind of experience like that again. And our home has been excellent ever since. So that's my story. I'm not exactly sure if it was a ghost or not, but it was definitely paranormal. All right. Thank you again, Lex, and everyone for listening. Take care.
And now a story from Tara in Salt Lake City, Utah. B&B Ghost. A few years ago, my mom, my brother's girlfriend, Paulina, and I flew to South Carolina to visit my brother, who, at the time, was stationed on the Marine base in Beaufort. We decided to stay at the Beaufort Inn for the weekend. The beautiful house is a classic example of Victorian architecture, with wide front porches and curved rear porches, and the four of us were staying in 2 rooms on the 3rd floor at the very end of a long hallway. My mom and I were in one room, and my brother with Paulina in the room across the hall. The first night we were there, my mom and I were getting ready for bed, and having just finished swimming, we had pulled a dresser drawer open wide and hung our swimsuits over the edge to dry. We were sitting in the queen bed reading, when out of the corner of my eye, I saw the strings of one of our swimsuits start to sway back and forth. I thought maybe a vent had turned on and started blowing air, so I didn't think much of it. But after a while, the strap still hadn't stopped swaying. So I stood up and checked for any vents or breezes. There were none. I immediately moved the suits and shut the dresser drawer. Freaked out, I got back into bed and later told my mom. We both fell asleep. During the night, I woke up to someone putting their hands on my arm. Thinking it was my mom, I asked, "What?" She didn't respond, so I rolled over and saw she was asleep, facing the opposite direction. Freaked out, I laid back down and pulled the covers over my head. It took me a while to fall back to sleep, but I eventually did. The next morning, I told my mom what had happened with the hand on my arm, and with a surprised look on her face, she told me the same thing had happened to her. She woke up to someone placing a hand on her shoulder. Thinking it was me, she rolled over to see, but I was facing the other direction, fast asleep. We were both a little spooked, but went about our morning. She and my brother left to get coffee, while I got ready in my room and Paulina got ready in her room. A little side note, each room was just a square bedroom with a small bathroom. So while I was doing my hair in the bathroom facing the mirror, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a woman with long brunette hair walk past the bathroom door. I didn't think much of it. I figured it was my mom who had got back from drinking coffee. But only seconds later, I saw the woman in my peripherals, standing in the doorway, watching me. I could see her hair was down, about her waist, and she looked to be wearing a long white nightgown. In these types of situations, one's mind moves very fast and processes so many thoughts in a quick instant. This whole scenario lasted maybe 30 seconds. Anyways, in my mind, when I saw the woman was watching me, I thought to myself, did they really get coffee that fast? I didn't hear the door open or any creaking across the wooden floor. My mom's hair is much shorter than that. I don't think that's my mom. I turned around to look, and the woman was gone. I walked out of the bathroom, and the bedroom was empty. I was completely alone. I hurried over to Paulina's room and waited for my mom and brother to get back before going back into my room. The story's from Chris in Hamburg, New York. Hide-and-seek ghost. First story. When I was young, I was playing hide-and-seek with my cousins in the evening. That night was my turn to be the seeker. In our basement, there were two parts. A nice part that was like a living room, and another part that was concrete and had a pantry, washer, and dryer. I was in the concrete part, looking for them in the dark. Suddenly, I saw a girl run by me and through a wall into the nice part of the basement. I got freaked out and turned on the lights, and nobody was there. I told my friends. They got freaked out, and we stopped playing hide-and-seek. That was the first time I had ever seen a ghost. I was 11 at that time. I'm 29 now. Second story. One night in 2016, I was at my girlfriend's house. All the lights were off after I got out of the shower. Earlier, when I walked through the kitchen of her apartment, I felt like there was someone or something in the kitchen, and that it was going to try to scare me. I told my girlfriend this. I'm very intuitive, and I call when I see a ghost do that, fooling ghosts. It's the feeling you get when ghosts are around. So after the shower, I walked through the kitchen on edge and called out for my girlfriend. She was watching Netflix, and I joined her. I soon found myself staring at a cat toy on a rope that was hanging from a cat tower. It began to slowly swing back and forth. I looked at my girlfriend and saw that she was watching it as well. There were no drafts, no windows open, and both cats were sleeping next to us. After a short while, the cat toy on a string shot up in the air like something threw it. I looked over at my girlfriend and said, "I told you there was a ghost here." From Hana in West Michigan, Old Michigan Home.
Hi Lex, my name's Hannah. I live in West Michigan. My story isn't actually anything that happened to me personally. I was actually like a wee child when it happened. But my stepsister, who is about 15 years older than me, I'd say, when she was growing up in her house with my stepfather and his ex-wife, the house they lived in was really old. I don't know how old, but very old. And she was playing one day, and her mom told her, Rebecca, that's her name, Rebecca, you need to stop playing. You need to do your homework. So she stopped playing. She did her homework, and later she ran up to her mom with a jump rope in her hand, and she said, "Mama, where'd that little girl go?" And her mom thought she was talking about her little sister, and she's like, "Your little sister? I don't know. She's playing somewhere too." And they had a very big yard. They had like farm animals and stuff. So, who knows where she was at. So she said, "No, not my little sister. The little Hispanic girl. She was on the stairs. She was sitting on the stairs when I was playing, and you made me do my homework. And I told her I'd be right back. And she said she'd wait right there." But she wasn't there whenever she went back. Their staircase was like right off the dining room, and it was really creepy. I can remember going there because we've always been family friends, and it always creeped me out. And the bathroom was upstairs, and I can remember so many days being a little kid there and like having to pee so bad, but holding it because I was not going to go up those stairs because it was so scary, because you'd go up a few stairs and you'd take a turn, and it was a really tall incline of stairs until you got to the landing. But like halfway up, there was this little loft area, and my stepbrother, it was like his favorite thing to sit in that loft area and scare out of me. So when my stepsister was telling me the story to scare me, probably, she swears up and down to this day, though, that little girl was there, and she doesn't know what happened to her, and she never saw her again. So my stepdad and his ex-wife actually looked into the history of their land, and it turned out that once upon a time there had been a migrant farming family that lived there. It was a husband and a wife, and I think they had like 3 children. And one night the house caught on fire, and they had a small daughter, and she didn't make it out of the fire. So we've always just kind of summed it up to it must have been her, and she was looking for a playmate, and my stepsister was playing with her. So that was really, it's always kind of creeped me out. Like, she obviously wasn't harmful or anything, and she didn't really make herself known very much, but as a child, it always creeped me out, and now I will drive past that house, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, that happened there. So that was one story from that house. Another story from that house is actually we lived like literally like 2 minutes around the corner from this house, and one night there was like really terrible storms happening, and our power went out, and the power had actually gone out at my stepdad's house as well. But it was kind of like everyone hunkered down because we were kind of like a big family unit. And so we went from our house over to my stepdad's house. And my stepdad and the man that my mom was with at the time had like gone off because they needed a part to fix something in the house. But all of us kids were like, we had made pallets on the floor, and we were sleeping, kind of, and my mom and my stepdad's ex-wife were sitting on the couch, and all of a sudden, all of us kids lit up because you could hear, it sounded like someone was walking across the top floor of the house, dragging like a ball and chain or something, like clear as day. And my mom does not believe in anything paranormal. I tell her to this day, the house that her and my stepdad live in, it's a different house now, still an old farm style house though. And I tell her, like, I'm not comfortable in your house. I always feel like I'm being watched. She tells me I'm crazy, but that day I can remember the look on my mom's face, and she heard that. And I always tell her, like, you think I'm crazy, but I remember that day. But it was like clear as day, you could hear it. And yet again, in this house, when I was growing up as a child, I never felt safe in that house. I mean, I guess I don't really know why. I never had like a spirit try to harm me or anything, but it was just, it's crazy to think that that's something paranormal that I experienced, because I really haven't experienced much paranormal. So between like stories that my sisters have told me and experiencing that night, I'm a believer. So I just want to thank you for letting me submit my story. I hope to hear it when I listen at work. Take care.
This is a story from Cyndy in Ottawa, Canada. The Screaming Ghost. We moved to northern Alberta in the late 70s when I was 15 years old. My father bought a ramshackle house that was one of the first houses built in the town of Bonnyville. I had several experiences there in that house, but the strangest was the Screaming Ghost. One night I was awakened by the sound of screaming. I walked to the small window we had in the hallway and listened for a few moments, trying to determine whether it was a local cat in heat. As I listened, I began to hear the voice of a child screaming, "Mommy! Mommy! I'm burning!" This went on for several minutes, each time sounding more and more terrified. I looked up and down the street for evidence of a fire, but saw none. I looked into the windows of each house, but they were all black. As I stood there, my sister appeared behind me. She was asking me what the sound was. My mother appeared as well. We all stood there, staring at the calm, quiet street outside, listening to the panic and terror rise in that voice as it shouted over and over that it was burning. Eventually it stopped and we went to bed. This was a small town with a population of 5,000. You could quite easily walk from one end of the town to the other. If there was a fire that had killed someone, it certainly would have been in the news. The next day, it wasn't in the papers and nobody mentioned it. My sister said she had read in a ghost book that there was a young girl who was burned alive in a fire and who occasionally visited people screaming. She told me that this was years ago. I'm not sure of the source or if she made it up. If any of your listeners have had a similar experience, I would be interested to hear about it. Paulina in Sweden. The Blacksmiths Wife. My family built our house on top of the ruins of an old blacksmith's home. The forge is still intact today. We mainly store firewood and garden equipment in it. I was young, around 10 or 11, when I woke up in the middle of the night needing to visit the bathroom. I could hear my younger brother snoring in the next room next to mine when I left. The moon was out, so I didn't have to rely on feeling my way around. When I finished, I washed my hands and opened the door out into the hallway. There was an open guest room opposite the bathroom. As I exited the bathroom, I froze with my hand on the doorknob. On the threshold, I saw a woman. She seemed to be made out of dark smoke, or what you'd think static on a radio would look like. I couldn't tell much about her clothes, other than she was wearing a dress and possibly an apron. She was standing in the guest room, folding some sort of cloth and putting them into neat piles on the bed. I watched her terrified, but must have moved because the threshold I was standing on let out a creak. The sound caught her attention. She put down the cloth she was holding and turned, but only her head, directly toward me. In the dark, the only thing I could tell about her face was that it kept changing as the smoke moved across it. Her gaze was not hostile, but rather deeply annoyed, as if I wasn't welcome or had interrupted her doing some important work. It was enough to wake me from my trance, and I ran straight to bed and hid under my covers until morning. I don't know why I didn't tell anyone then. I think I knew no one would believe it and dismiss it as a nightmare or hallucination. I started making sure, though, that using the bathroom was the last thing I did before going to bed, so I would not have to wake up at night. Almost a year after the incident, my little brother came to me, proud, telling me he was no longer afraid of ghosts. I asked him why, as I hadn't known he'd been afraid of ghosts in the first place, and he wasn't shy to answer. Over the year, he had sometimes been afraid to leave his room when he woke up at night because, he said, a silent, faceless woman made of smoke watched him from the doorway to his room. Last month, though, he confronted her. He walked straight through her as if she wasn't there, and she evaporated into a million pieces of soot. He hasn't seen her since, and was convinced he scared her away from our home. I'm not quite sure this isn't as much her home as ours. And a story from Michelle in New York. The Haunted Old Mill Bakery. Many years ago, when I was in college, I worked part-time at a small family-owned bakery in upstate New York. I've always been an artistic type, and I was excited to be training with the owner's daughter to become a cake decorator. The bakery was located next to a large creek, and the back of the building was an old stone mill that had been renovated and housed the ovens, bread mixers, freezers, and bread racks. The front of the bakery and storefront was a simple brick building that had been added on years later. During the busy graduation and wedding seasons, I was often asked to go in on Sunday and catch up on cake orders. The family regularly attended church on Sunday, and the bakery was not open. I liked working alone and needed the pay, so I didn't mind doing this from time to time. It was during these times that I first discovered there was a heaviness in the air at the bakery. Usually the bakery was humming with orders, music was playing on the radio, and customers were chatting out in the dining area. On these Sundays, working alone, it was quiet and still. There were two swinging pantry doors that separated the old mill portion of the bakery from the area where we decorated cakes and the storefront. I soon found myself avoiding going beyond those swinging doors at all costs. Once beyond the door, there was a noticeable change in the air. It was thick and heavy and felt as if it were pressing on you. Immediately, I would feel as if 1,000 eyes were staring at me, even though I knew the building was empty. One Sunday afternoon, I was decorating a cake, and I distinctly heard the side door, which was around the corner and down a small hallway, open and slam shut. I felt a breeze of warm air rush into the bakery from the outside. I glanced up from the cake, expecting to see the owner's daughter, who told me she may be stopping by later. Yet there was nobody there. The side door was a huge metal door. It had a distinct sound when opened, and did not open easily. I stopped what I was doing and looked around for the baker who had opened the door. I even peeked out into the parking lot. There was nobody there except me. Though shaken, I mustered enough courage to finish the cake I was working on and went home immediately afterwards. Some time passed before the next incident, and since then I'd convinced myself it was a lack of sleep that caused me to think the door had opened and shut on its own. It was another quiet Sunday afternoon, and I was working alone again. I had a whole table full of graduation cakes that I was decorating. As I was piping buttercream roses on the corners of the sheet cake, I heard a man's voice, as clear as a bell, come from the dining area.
Hello? Excuse me.
Every hair on the back of my neck stood up. I dropped my piping bag and peered out into the dining area. Nobody was there. I was quite shaken and unable to finish my work. I put everything away the best I could and left immediately. A few days later during the week, I was decorating cakes alongside the owner's daughter. I decided to tell her what had happened on Sunday because it was bothering me so much. I didn't know what she would think, perhaps that I was crazy. Instead, she very casually shrugged and said, "Well, that doesn't sound too bad. Have you seen the shadow people yet?" She proceeded to tell me about the shadow figures that resided in the old mill portion of the bakery. Both she and her family had seen child-sized black shadows darting between bread racks. Her mother was passing by at that moment and agreed that the bakery was a very haunted place, and didn't realize that I didn't know already. It is true. The stone mill portion of the bakery was very, very old, and I'm sure there is some history there, though I've been unable to find any information on it. I do know the area was formerly a river settlement inhabited by the Mohawk and Oneida Native American tribes before British colonists began to inhabit the area. At any rate, the family seemed at peace with it, and it continues to be a productive family-owned business to this day. And that's it for Anything Ghost number 236. Send your stories into Anything Ghost and get them in show number 237. A local ghost legend or your personal ghost experience. Either record it yourself and send me that, or type it up and send me that. For everything Anything Ghost, go to www.anythingghost.com, and you can send all your correspondence and stories to lex@anythingghost.com. And don't forget about this episode of Anything Ghost's sponsor. It's Anything Ghost, the Anything Ghost VIP group. You can join for a one-time fee and have access to the complete library. Go to anythinggoes.com and the Join the VIP Group tab for more information.